Welcome to a new episode of Post-PhD Directions, where we explore career paths for PhDs beyond academia. Today, we're diving into medical writing, a field where PhDs can use their scientific expertise to craft clear, impactful medical content. And our guest today is Dr. Vicky Sherwood. She's a freelance medical writer and the founder of Biomed Badass, where she helps PhDs transition into medical writer roles within pharma and biotech. She got her PhD from the University of Nottingham in biosciences, and with multiple years of experience in medical writing, she has worked in pharma industry. She has now moved into becoming a freelance medical writer, and we will chat about how you can break into medical writing, which skills are needed, and how you can actually successfully make that transition. And if you're curious about medical writing, stay tuned. This episode is packed with a lot of actionable advice. And with this, Vicky, it's my absolute pleasure to have you here today. Welcome.
Thanks, Eleanor, and thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited to talk, always excited to talk about medical writing, but definitely to PhDs because that's my own background. So I faced a lot of barriers when I first broke in. So if anybody is interested in medical writing, I'm always excited to impart knowledge in that area for folks.
I'm so honored to have you on here because, I've saw you on LinkedIn. I see what you do and I think is immensely valuable. And I thought, I'm actually myself curious because I have no idea about medical writing myself. So it's always a bit selfish. I invite people that I'm interested in talking to and then I just share it with the world. But I think just like probably a lot of other PhDs out there, I don't really know what medical writing entails, what it means. Vicky, could you give us a short intro to the world of medical writing? How can we think about medical writing?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think we were talking about this before we hit the record button. It's such an expansive umbrella term, medical writing, and it spans across lots and lots of different career paths that can be within two main industries, really, within either the healthcare industry or the pharmaceutical industry or biopharma industry. And if you think about biopharma, it's selling its products in the healthcare industry. So we've got communications that span across both industries. And medical writers can work within both spaces as well. But typically speaking, writers tend to specialize in several areas. So in the in the healthcare industry, that could be things like ghostwriting for clinicians, or maybe writing, website copy for clinics or advertising materials for clinics, things like that. But I specifically work within the pharmaceutical industry. So I'll probably talk a little bit more in depth about that because that's my area of expertise. The pharmaceutical industry really needs communications within three main areas, I would say. So you've got regulatory, which is an area where the pharma company has to handle kind of submissions, and it usually does that within regulatory affairs, and those are submissions to agencies like the FDA, for example, who are then going to approve the licenses in order for the pharmaceutical company to be able to market that drug to a particular patient group within a specific geography, the FDA obviously being North America. And then we've got the different agencies, obviously, elsewhere in the world. Now, the pharma industry, therefore, needs people to be able to put those regulatory documents together and all the information that the FDA needs. And it also needs to put a lot of documentation together for the clinical trials process as well. So you get within regulatory, you'll get regulatory writers who specialize within specific areas. So maybe within writing protocols for clinical trials or specific documents that would need submitting to the FDA for licensing. And then even after approval, if we think about a drug as it's in the marketplace, the FDA aren't stupid. They know that when you submit for a license to sell the drug, you're giving the clinical trial data. Now, that's a very closed, controlled environment in which you've assessed the efficacy and safety of the drug. When it goes out into the real world, of course, into a population who maybe aren't following what the package insert of the drug says, they're taking it without eating when they should, or they're missing doses and then taking multiple doses the following week. The FDA still want to know, is it still effective in that population? And is it still safe? Are there any new safety indications? So you've got to be, as well, reporting back all the time information as you gather real world evidence about how that drug is working in the market, out in the population. So regulatory writers will work across all those different areas, and they can specialise in those different areas of writing. So that's one area that the pharma company needs help with. Then we've got medical. Okay, and this is the area I tend to work in, medical communications. So in medical communications tends to be often run by medical affairs within the pharma company. It's really thinking about setting up a two-way conversation, if you like. That's the easiest way of thinking it, with the healthcare industry. So as I said before, the pharma companies, they're selling their drugs in the healthcare space, and they have to interact with people there. So healthcare practitioners, HCPs, but also patients, carers, and the general public more widely. Any stakeholder that's interested within healthcare. So the medical affairs will start to educate the healthcare industry about their product pipeline, about what's coming through, new assets that might be helpful for patients in advance of them maybe submitting the license and then marketing the drug. So they'll start to educate through that whole clinical trials process. But it's not just about education, it's also about, as I said, a kind of a two-way conversation and gathering insights also from the healthcare industry. So communications that are happening there are things like training materials, classic kind of publications that PhDs would be used to writing themselves. So within academic journals, but more like clinical journals like New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, things like that. Congress work, so materials that are going to congresses and symposia, and then even things like advisory boards where you would get experts within a specific therapeutic area to maybe come and ask their questions and thoughts in and around that. And the writer would go to those meetings, listen in, gather those insights and feed them back to the pharmaceutical company. So it's very much about kind of a two-way education process on both sides. And that's, I think, probably the best way you can describe medical communications in all its entirety. And again, it's very varied work. So you get writers who specialise within that area as well. And then the final piece is kind of your more classic commercial marketing piece that the pharma company needs help with. So that would, things like advertisements, sales materials, press releases, social media work, PR work. And that tends to be handled more by third-party agencies, your classic PR agencies or advertising agencies, but it would be handled within the pharma company by commercial affairs. So it's more commercial activities that will happen once you've got the license. So really, writers will span and produce content in all of these areas, but I hope you can see they're very different career paths because they require different skills. You've got your regulatory writers who are looking very much at, data heavy document, almost a lot more technical. You've got your medical communications, which is a lot about education writing, insight gathering, strategy. And then you've got more your commercial writing, which again is more about advertising, maybe a little bit more creative in the output. All require scientific expertise. But again, the content and the output is different, but we're all working within the pharma industry. I hope that doesn't overcomplicate it.
No, Vicky, it was amazing. Honestly, I loved it. I learned so much for myself, but I think it's a very important, we had to set the spaces to distinguish, right? Because as you also said before we started, is when you look into moving into medical writing, knowing the differences and knowing what to look for in job ads and being able to differentiate is quite important. But I think you gave a fantastic overview, and it's already interesting because, as you said yourself, you will need probably different interests in all these different areas, although they fall under the medical writing umbrella. Mm-hmm. And it makes me quite curious, Vicky. So how did you move into medical writing? Did you do some courses? What was your career path getting into this exciting
Yeah, so we touched on this as well earlier, didn't we, Eleanor? I was a bit late to it, if I'm honest. When I think back through my academic career, I always enjoyed the communications aspects of being a scientist. I loved going to congresses and conferences. I loved meeting other scientists, learning about what they were doing. I liked communicating the research we were doing as a group. I liked writing papers. I even enjoyed writing my thesis as a PhD student. And that should have been the first indication that I was a natural communicator, because I remember my peers at the time pulling their hair out, absolutely hating it. And whilst, it was challenging, and I can't say, it was a walk in the park, I didn't hate it. right? I actually thought there's aspects here I really enjoy bringing out the scientific message here and fitting it within the wider context of scientific knowledge. But I didn't know anything about medical writing at that time when I was writing my PhD thesis. So I was very much like a lot of people, I think, in academia, kind of going with the flow, choosing the path of least resistance, which obviously when your mentors are other academic supervisors is going to do a postdoc and then going to get a grant and starting your own group if you can. And I know that's got a lot more challenging over the years, but at least back when I was doing it, it was still definitely an option that was open to a lot of people. So I did that. I ended up becoming a PI. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I really loved the research. However, because I was this natural communicator, I was always thinking, is there something else I can do other than just the research? It kind of pulled me back in a way. And I just serendipitously ended up speaking to somebody who was working as a medical writer who told me what she did for a living. So she said, I go to conferences, I meet key opinion leaders in therapeutic areas. I get to write up the information that they disseminate back to the pharma company. I write up scientific papers. I write posters for congresses. And I just thought it was a revelation. I thought I didn't even know that this was an option. I didn't even know medical writing existed back then. So we're talking about 10 to 12 years ago when this first idea started to bubble away in my head. And I thought, I've probably missed out here. I should have found this earlier, but I'm not going to let it hold me back. I'm going to make the transition. So that's what I did. And I transitioned initially into agencies who are third-party providers of medical communications writing for the pharma industry. I learned my grounding there in those agencies as a associate or entry-level writer. And then I moved over I was at the time in London, and I moved to Dublin to work in a big pharma company, Novartis. And I should say that what I'm saying to you today, Eleanor, has nothing to do with any of the companies that I work for, any of the clients that I work for now. It's obviously my own opinions. But firstly, I worked at Novartis as a writer, and then I was promoted into a more management role where I was leading the scientific writing team for oncology in-house at Novartis, which was a fantastic role. It was a hiring manager's role. So I know a lot about also hiring talent into the medical communications industry as well. So all in all, yes, I stumbled across it. And I think lots of medical writers would say that. The tool that I used, though, to break in was actually networking. So through talking to that first person that kindly shared their information about their career, I ended up contacting more medical writers, learning a little bit more about what they do, learning that there were different areas of medical writing and where I would prefer to work, and then starting to make connections within the industry. And that's actually what moved the needle for me and enabled me eventually to make the transition and move in.
You said so many valuable things, Vicky, really, and I just want to say, so inspiring that you really, when you realized maybe, medical writing or writing is something that I'm naturally passionate about, that you actually followed the path. Although you were already, you were a PI, you were probably quite established, and you realized medical writing could be something that really excites me, that I'm passionate about, and you actually followed your passion. So I think that's amazing, because I meet a lot of PhDs that go with the flow, just as you. We never really sit back and think and reflect and ask ourselves, does this still serve me? What are my interests? It's just this pre-walked path that we just go. And some of us at some point realize, oh, is this really what I want? Or do I want something else? So I think it's amazing, and I think it's super inspiring to hear. And I hope, if someone is in a similar situation, maybe they will sit and reflect a little bit if this is still for them. But also what you said in terms of breaking into the field, you said networking was one of the most important tools. And I love that you emphasized it and that you went out and you talked to other medical writers. I always say to PhD students, look, what are your skills? What do they align with? And then talk to people who work in these roles to learn more, to understand what does the day-to-day look like. But also you get a little bit of a competitive advantage, because, Vicky, all of a sudden you hear which lingo do they use. And you can use all of these things and sprinkle them in when you apply for a job. And this really brings me to my next question. Vicky, you just mentioned you worked as a hiring manager. So what do you think, if I'm a PhD or a postdoc and I think, wow, medical writing would be really cool, what do you think could give my application a little bit of an edge to stick out and be unique that Vicky on the other side would say, wow, I really want to talk to this person? What is it for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Eleanor. Just to go back on one point you said about that introspective piece of work, it's so important. And I think when you're, as I was, a scientific researcher at a lab bench, you're just so caught up in the moment and the busyness of everything you've got to do. Even later on, when I was running the lab, of writing grants all the time and helping people in their projects, I never took the time to do that introspective work. And it's so important. Otherwise, you're going to end up like me 15 years down the road, realizing you should have done it earlier. I haven't looked back and I have no regrets. I absolutely love being in the industry. But if I'd have made the decision as a PhD student rather than as a PI, I would have been in the industry now for nearly 25 years. As it is, I've only been a medical writer for just under a decade. So, that's how important I would say it is in terms of not thinking through what you want to do. So let me move on to your second question about the hiring manager, what hiring managers looking for. And, I've seen the good, the bad and the ugly of all applications. I think the key thing to get across straight away is your passion and interest and connecting that with the company. So as I said before, I worked for a large Swiss pharma company, very popular. When we put an advert out, we would be saturated with applications. And a lot of those applications were very generic. They were I want to work for a large pharma company, and not explaining exactly why they wanted to be a medical writer. I was hiring for medical communications writers. So it's very important to get that across, especially when you're coming from academia. It's not obvious to a hiring manager what interests you about being a medical writer, what interests you about the communications part of being a medical writer in medical communications. And so to get that across is really important. So I always say you must have a cover letter. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, it's not important or it's not valuable, but without that, you can't make that connected piece. Obviously, you've got all your expertise within your resume, but you somewhere got to explain why. Give the hiring manager that why. And it's also really helpful, this is a top tip, to put it into a summary piece also somewhere within your resume at the top. Obviously, when you become a senior writer, it's obvious to a hiring manager why you might be applying for a position, but not when you're coming straight out of academia. So you've got to have it somewhere. And I can't tell you the amount of times I'd gone to a folder to look at a candidate, and for some reason the cover letter isn't there, just the resume or the CV. So if there's space at the top of your CV, you should make a summary and make sure that you have that key piece of information, your why, up front and at the top. So the two documents don't get separated, because the hiring manager is going to want to know that. They're going to want to know that for a number of reasons, but really because they want to know that it's worth the effort interviewing you, that, you're really keen to be a medical writer and you understand what it means to be a medical writer as well. So in terms of the skills, PhDs have a lot of the skills that we need, especially if you're a PhD in a scientific subject. You think about the technical skills of scientific writing, having eye for detail, being able to QC and review work. You might be a subject matter expert in a particular therapeutic area. You may have done 4 years of research on diabetes, for example, and you can leverage that understanding. You're also very innovative. You're an innovative thinker as a PhD, and you're usually self-sufficient as well. So those technical and research skills are what employers are looking for, and they will come, they will come across very strongly in your application anyway as a PhD. Then coupled to that, you've got project management skills that you will have had. You're running your own projects. So being organized, having clear documentation, completing tasks, effective time management, all those sorts of things, meeting milestones and deliverables. You will have done those. Just make sure it comes across strongly in your application. Then you've got your communications skills aside from just your scientific writing. So being able maybe to communicate to different audiences. So say, for example, if you've done some outreach work, maybe public speaking about your research, those types of things, that looks really good. If you can adapt your communication style from scientific to non-scientific audiences, because we have to do that as writers. We do it a lot. We write for patients, we write for subject matter experts, but also not all doctors or clinicians or healthcare practitioners are subject matter experts. GPs, for example, they're experts in medicine, but they might not be subject matter experts on a particular therapy. And so we have to adapt our writing style. We have to be receptive to criticism for improvement. We do that a lot as PhDs. We're brilliant at that. How many times have you stood up, presented your research project and had it pulled apart in front of an audience? It's one of the skills we're really good at, and you have to get used to that. You leave the ego at home as a writer. I remember my first writing pieces when I first started off in the industry, and I've written a lot of manuscripts before, so I thought, I'm pretty good at writing manuscripts. And when I got it back from the senior writing colleagues, the track changes. You couldn't even see what I'd written. Everything had changed, right? So you have to get used to that. And I think as PhDs, we are good at that. We're really good at that. We don't let that knock us. It's something we've been conditioned to do that through the process of getting the PhD. And then being able to translate that scientific complexity into simple messages. That's a key piece as well, which we have to do in our thesis. We have to do in our papers, have to do at Congress presentations, right? People management is a big part as well. A lot of people think, okay, as a medical writer, you're going to sit there with data, you're going to write all day and just look at that. But actually, you're not. You're working in a team. Of course, you're going to be looking at data and writing, but you're also working in a team. You're working with designers, you're working with editors, you're working with other writers to pull the communications pieces together. So, you're not an entity working on your own. It's a real team collaborative effort. And then you've got your client, whoever's commissioned the work within the pharma company. You've got to build relationships with them, and you've got to learn how to manage them as well. So being, charming, positive, enthusiastic, diplomatic, patient, all these sorts of things, working within a multicultural environment. As a PhD, you'll be used to that as well in academia. And that's essential because I've worked with writers in India, in North America, across Europe, in all different cultures. So that's super important as well. And then obviously as you become more senior, you'll be training others. So if you've got those expertise as well, maybe you've trained junior researchers in the lab, definitely you want to be putting that on your applications as well. So I think you can see a lot of the valuable skills that we have at PhDs are desired within this industry. So bring all that to the fore, but with it, bring your passion and interest for medical writing, and that should help you fly. Now, the area where PhDs tend to lack, as I did myself, is more that commercial acumen piece. So as you become a senior writer, you're expected to run projects on your own. You're also expected to be highly productive, so be efficient in your work, keep on top of technology trends, identify new business opportunities with your clients, all these sorts of things that maybe you won't have done so much in your PhD and academic training. But that's okay. I mean, they understand that. But what you've got to be is knowledgeable and open to the fact that you would be somebody who's keen to do that as well. You're keen to work with clients, build relationships, and you understand that there is a commercial side to the work that we do as well. So I hope that kind of summarizes what people should be focusing on.
Vicky, you completely captivated me. I think you gave such an insightful explanation of how we as a PhD can leverage our skills in this role. I think it's fantastic, and it actually seems like we have already quite a lot of what one would need. So would you say most people that you have met in your career or throughout your career have a PhD who are in medical writing, or do you think it is an advantage to have it? And if yes or no, and what are the different subject matter expertises that you have met?
It's a great question, and it's a question I get a lot of the time, because obviously as me talking about medical writing, who's come from a scientific background with a PhD, and the other one I get is asked is, do I need to be a native English speaker as well? Because obviously that's me, right? I'm British. And the answer to all of these things is no. You don't, right? Now, a PhD is an advantage. I've just been through details why that is. You're very self-sufficient. You're innovative. You can go away and you've got all those research skills. That's what the industry needs. But that doesn't mean that if you don't have a PhD, you haven't got those skills as well, or you can't adapt to those skills. So I've worked with writers, and we are a broad spectrum bunch. Most of us have had careers elsewhere before we came in, because most of us found out about this as I did a bit later on. And I've worked with writers who, a lot of us do have PhDs, yes, but a lot, maybe 50% don't, maybe have master's degrees or bachelor's degrees. And it really comes out in the wash. There's excellent writers with or without PhDs. I'd say I've been in the fortunate position of working with lots of writers who are extremely talented and I've learned a lot from, either have had a PhD or haven't. So it doesn't preclude you from applying if you don't have a PhD. That's the first thing. However, obviously, you can bring a lot of skills from your PhD through, which will help you in the application. If I think of the backgrounds that you asked about, a lot of us have come from academia. So this is a path really well trodden. So I'd say at least maybe 60% folks have maybe come through that research background. If not as a PhD, maybe as a technician, or they've come through the academic research track. But then we've got a large portion of writers who've come from healthcare. So, maybe healthcare professionals who are looking for a little bit more balance in their life, who maybe love talking to patients and other colleagues about, therapies and new therapies that then can put their skills to good use. So we've got a lot of folks there. We've also got folks from biopharma who've maybe been in R&D in different areas of biopharma, but then maybe again are realizing that communications is something that interests them more, and they might move across into writing roles. And then we've got journalists and editors and people who've come from that background as well. So quite a few folks who maybe worked for academic journals as editors might move into medical communications in pharma. And then we've got veterinary medicine, or any background. But what I would say is, as long as you've got some STEM training, I'd say that's probably the key piece, because whilst there are people who've come from maybe English language or journalism, they are a lot more in a minority. Most folks have some STEM training background, and that's because you're looking at data and you need to be able to interpret data and understand the scientific message. Coming to that fresh without kind of a scientific background, I should imagine would be quite daunting. Although it can be done, but most people have scientific backgrounds. So it doesn't really matter what your PhD is in. Obviously, if you have worked, as I said before, on diabetes, for example, for 4 years, you can leverage that in your application. But equally, I've worked with medical writers who've got an ecology background, who've maybe got a chemistry background or physics. As long as you can interpret data and you can understand the scientific message, that's the key thing. When I moved across from academia, my research was very basic. It wasn't that clinical. I mean, I'd read a few clinical papers because we were working on metastatic skin cancer, but it wasn't really an area of expertise for me. So one thing I did find that helped me, at least initially with the first projects that I had as a writer, was to do a course to try and get up to speed with clinical trials, because that was just not an area that I fully understood the nuances of. So there's lots of free online courses that you can do at reputable universities. I think the one I did was at Stanford, but I'm not sure now if it exists because it was over 10 years ago. Equally, you can Google these and find those courses, and that will stand you in good stead if you don't have that kind of clinical understanding. Because what's going to happen is on your first projects, they're going to give you some clinical data from a clinical trial, and you're going to have to interpret it and turn it into scientific messages. So if you can get up to speed with that, that would be great if you haven't got it as part of your, ongoing research. If you're not a clinical researcher, I should say.
Really, really valuable tips. And also, I just want to point out at this point that, of course, you post a lot on LinkedIn about breaking into medical writing. And if someone is interested, I will put the link. I just want to mention it. I will put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and also, of course, to your blog, where I assume you talk all about.
I do. And so I have a newsletter that I post opportunities for people to break in. I have a lot of tips, and I share webinars that are available, things like that. But also, when you subscribe, I've got a free book, Breaking into Medical Writing, which will deep dive a lot on what we've discussed today and further.
Fantastic. So I will link all of it in the show notes. So if you're interested, Vicky is the person to go to. She's a wealth of knowledge, actually. It's super interesting talking to. I'm learning as I'm listening. Is amazing. So Vicky, if someone is now thinking, I really think it sounds all amazing. So how can I think of a typical day of a medical writer? What is it that you do?
Yeah, so typical day, there's never a typical day, Eleanor, because it's so varied. The types of projects I work on within medical communications, I could be working 1 week on diabetes, the next week on multiple sclerosis, the week after that on prostate cancer. It's that varied. And it's one of the things I love about being a medical writer, because when I was in academia, I loved cancer research. I still do. But that's all I focused on. And I focused on a teeny niche on metastatic skin cancers. Now, as I said, I could be working on multiple therapy areas in 1 week. So I find that really exciting. It can be daunting because you've got to get up to speed with a new therapeutic area. But equally, my understanding of disease is way beyond where I was 10 years ago because of the opportunities I've had to work in these different areas. So that's the first thing. It's extremely varied. I work from home and I work for myself as a freelancer. I contract out either to agencies or farmers directly. And so, I'm 100% remote. So I get on in the morning, I look at my emails, I see what projects are coming in from different clients, and then I prioritize my week. Very similar, if you were working in-house in an agency or in pharma, the first thing you do is go to your emails, check where your projects are up to, and then structure out your week. You have to be disciplined, I would say, because it's easy sometimes to think, oh, I'll just go and do something else, I don't know, put some laundry on or something. And suddenly the day's running away and, you've still got your projects to deliver. So that's something you have to learn quite early on. So you need to sit and be disciplined, but also you need to take regular breaks because it is a job where you're sitting, you're looking at data, you've maybe got client calls, and before you know it, you've sat 4 or 5 hours straight. So one thing I've learned over the years is definitely get up, factor in time for a walk. You can use techniques like Pomodoro where, you work intensively for a while, then have a break, then work intensively. You just have to work it around you. So that's kind of how the job is. It's varied, but, there's a lot of computer work. You're not at the lab bench anymore, getting up and down and sorting out Western blots.
Cool. Thank you so much for your insight. And I do actually have a bit of a different question for you, Vicky, because, I always say I advocate for PhDs to be on LinkedIn. We're at the forefront of knowledge creation. I wish so many more PhDs would share their knowledge in a more layman language with all these 1 billion people on this platform. Also because I know a lot of PhD programs don't necessarily have the focus on helping PhDs communicating to a broader audience. For example, I worked with clinicians, I worked with other experts in my field, and I already learned, okay, clinicians, you have to adapt the language, right? What I always say to people, and I would like to hear your opinion on this, I say, go on LinkedIn and demonstrate that you have the skill. And isn't there a better way of demonstrating that you have a skill for medical writing than go out and write? Would you think this is something, if I feel like I want to be a medical writer, I could just go on LinkedIn and talk about my research in a layman language and try to communicate it to someone. If you saw someone who did that already, would that be something where you think, oh, wow, that's actually really cool? And maybe open you a door into medical writing because you've already not only shown that you can do it, but also you have the passion because you already up before you wanted to do the job.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think there's some shocking statistic where less than 10% of people on LinkedIn are actually posting content. I think a lot of people are just there observing. So, you can get your research out there and you can show it. Absolutely. And even you don't have to limit it to your own research. You can, if you find a topic that's interesting, something you've seen, you can share it, make a few concise notes about it, ask other people's opinion and start to build communications, a little chat around that. And it will start to attract people from the industry naturally, right? So if, for example, I'm going to be working on a project soon on lupus. I didn't know anything about lupus. So, hashtag lupus is something I would be interested in learning more about. So, you'll start to naturally attract people within the industry who are working there and maybe would comment on your posts. And that builds into this whole network as well and building that future role network for your career. So absolutely 100% LinkedIn all the way, I would say. It's an amazing tool and I don't think people are leveraging it nearly enough.
Vicky, I'm so 200% with you. It's like I have a few tasks in my life and one of them is really to advocate. I want to see more academics on LinkedIn. I want them to come and share their knowledge. I think it's so incredible. And I see a lot of them are struggling with it because they think, what do I have to talk about? And I'm like, guys, you're the 1% of the population, world population, that is actually creating knowledge. If you don't have anything to say, who has? So thank you. That was good. I think it might motivate some maybe to be like, oh wow, actually it could help me in my career development. Not only for the purpose of writing, but also for the purpose of building this network, because this is exactly what happened. All of a sudden you attract like-minded people. This is what you do. Yeah. And that's what I think is so amazing about LinkedIn, Vicky, because you can meet people, the world becomes so small all of a sudden. And you can meet people from all over the world. It's amazing. Most of the podcast guests that I have sitting with me, I meet on LinkedIn. And this is where I met you, Vicky, where I became aware of your work. And I thought it was so valuable for anyone who wants to move into this direction. And that's, how we came to sit here and discuss this topic today. And I'm grateful that I'm on there, that I get to meet all these people. So I can just encourage everyone. Yeah, use LinkedIn. Is so, yes.
And if I may just add there, because I think one other thing people get intimidated about is it becomes daunting. I think a lot of people think, gosh, I'm going to have to be like an influencer on there to make an impact. But actually, just 10 or 15 minutes, every day for 5 days a week in your working week, instead of, going down to the coffee room and shooting the breeze with your colleagues, go onto LinkedIn, post something, find people to connect with, read something interesting. It doesn't take long. And actually that starts to add up really quickly in the whole networking domain, and, building that future role network and getting your voice out there and getting your research shared. You'll come a long way in a few weeks if you just stick to that and devote 10 minutes a day.
Love the message. Thank you so much, Vicky. And I could talk to you forever. I think it's the longest episode in the short history of this podcast.
Oh, I am sorry.
No. I didn't mean this in any way. I could just sit and keep chatting because I think it's so interesting, really. But it's also, you're an amazing communicator. So it's no, really, I think you have a quite captivating way of talking. So I really, really, really enjoyed this conversation with you. And I just want to say thank you, Vicky.
You're welcome.
For sharing your expertise. I'm so sure this will help so many PhDs get clarity of, first of all, become aware, or get clarity whether this may be for them or may not be for them, and also how they can actually think of their PhD education in relation to moving into medical communication. I think you have explained this so well, so thank you so much. I found it very helpful, and I'm sure a lot of other PhDs, postdocs, academics, actually anyone really will find it helpful. And if you found it helpful, please make sure to connect, follow Vicky on LinkedIn. As I said, I will put the link into the show notes. Check out her Biomed Badass website, will also be in the show notes. And check out the free guide that Vicky has. So you sign up for her email list, and then you will get a free guide, which I'm sure after this conversation, I know is full of valuable tips and tricks to move into medical writing. And if you enjoyed this episode, like every week, please leave us a review. It will help other PhDs find this podcast more easily. And if you need more support with your transition into a non-academic role, check out our website. Link also in the show notes. And with this, again, thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you for the opportunity, Eleanor.